Welcome everyone to our ALIAVic Information Online Conference wrap-up. So glad to see so many people here. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So, I wasn't able to get to the Information Online Conference, and I'm sure some of you also weren't able to get there, so I'm quite excited to hear from our speakers. We will begin with Paula Kelly-Paul, who is the Manager of Learning Communities at Hobsons Bay City Council, and has a passion for supporting learning and literacy in all its forms and has been involved in public building projects for over 2 decades. Paula.
Thanks, James, and it's a delight to be here, of course, not only in my role as Manager of Learning Communities at Hobsons Bay City Council, as James mentioned, but also as a Director on the ALIA board. So thank you for voting for me if you did. If you didn't, well, there's another time coming up. I'm here this evening, first of all, would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the people of the Wurundjeri tribe, but also to invite you to have a look when you leave this evening, if you haven't already done that, to look at the beautiful artwork that's in the entrance foyer of this lovely building here at Kathleen Syme Library and Community Centre. It's called Wominjinka, which means welcome, and it's a beautiful piece of Aboriginal art that was created when this lovely building was established a couple of years ago. I had the great privilege of being involved with the creation of this lovely community centre and library when I was working for the City of Melbourne as the Melbourne Library Service Manager as well. So do have a look at that, it's really very special. I'm going to take you on a bit of a whirlwind tour. Forgive me, you are going to get a bit dizzy over the next, I think I've got 9 more minutes, James, is that right? I think I've got 10 minutes. I decided that I would take you through my tweeting, which you might say, oh God, that's going to be painful, so I apologise in advance if it is, but I do tend to tweet at conferences by way of note-taking. So it's been a little jog for me to look back on my tweets from Info Online, and I'm going to just give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the presentations that were given through my twittering, and refer to a couple of the presentations in particular. I do want to first of all apologise to Mike Jones in his presence this evening because I didn't attend his session, which I already confessed at dinner, so don't feel too bad, Mike. You know, this is not news to you, but you're not on my tweet because I was only tweeting on the presentations that I attended, so with due respect there. First of all, this is Linda Lay, who's the chair of the ALIA board at the moment, who is opening the conference and I think we were in Sydney. I'm just trying to remember because I've done that much travel over the last couple of weeks. Remind me, were we in Sydney? Thank you. Sorry, I've been in Canberra and Brisbane and I was just trying to remember where I was. So Linda was opening the conference, and I'm going to just go through the tweets. I'm going to try and keep to the ones that are actually about Info Online because, of course, there's a few there that might be other bits and pieces. First of all, I want to mention Genevieve Bell. Now, Genevieve Bell was the opening keynote. Quite an extraordinary presenter at the conference. Let me tell you a little bit about her first of all, and then I'll read a couple of the tweets that I made there. She was talking about artificial intelligence, but particularly she's the director of the 3A Institute, which is in the Florence Volliet Mackenzie Chair, as well as a distinguished professor at the Australian National University. She's got a whole list of amazing qualifications, but she's actually a cultural anthropologist, technologist, and a futurist, best known for her work in the intersection of cultural practice and technology development. She was really challenging us on looking at the ways in which art intersects with technology and culture as well. So some of the things that she said there was reminding us about that intersectionality around the role of women in technology as well. So one of the tweets that I put there was that she reminded us that Australia's first gamer was actually a woman. You may not know that. And the woman figured out how to play Pong on CIRAC, which is Australia's first computer, which was the big Sierra computer, of course. But she was talking to us about defining artificial intelligence and certainly pointing out the role of women in computing and in the early days of the development of artificial intelligence. I've lost mine again. Here we go, sorry. There we go. So she's defining artificial intelligence for us, looking at the work of Skinner, of course, and that if humans are just machines, then intelligence is a series of tasks. Apparently, the Americans wanted to translate the Russian language in the 50s and 70s. So big investments were being made in decoding and language symbols. And there, Genevieve says that artificial intelligence, again, makes machines use language, form abstractions and concepts, and solve the kind of problems that were now reserved for humans and improve themselves. So this is the kind of challenging opening we had to the conference. She provoked us by talking about the seduction of the idea that machines will learn from themselves, which might be also terribly scary for some of us, not just a seductive idea. And she said she was wondering how we might tame the computer's transcendent charm. Again, taking this idea that computers and artificial intelligence can have a human kind of quality to them. Quite a challenge for us. So she was talking then about how we might use data visualizations around combining algorithms to provide delight. Some of us were quite intrigued and refreshed by this, that we weren't just talking about the dry application of technology, but actually applying technology, artificial intelligence, to things of familiarity to create something beautiful and something delightful. She also asked us what an algorithm for discomfort might look like, and she challenged us around the way in which artificial intelligence might dangerously be using a range of presumes or presumptions around the information it's decoding. In other words, challenging us to think about diversity in the space of technology and artificial intelligence. Are they learning to imagine, or are machines understanding more about ourselves than we know about ourselves? Quite provocative questions. Another thing that she talked about was some partnerships that were very interesting. One of them was around the Royal Shakespeare Company, who were making the Tempest more dynamic. So in Stratford, and some of you may have had the joy of going to that lovely little town in England that has that funny little bridge and a house sort of at the end of the bridge. Shakespeare's, apparently one of Shakespeare's homes. That it needed more power to power that experience of animating and activating the Tempest in a technological way than it takes to power the space station. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know if that's a wise use of power, but that's okay. We're not here to judge, we're just here to be interested in it. I'm just going to zoom down a bit now because I am going to come to, there we have our welcome to country, but come to see out some of the other speakers. There's Genevieve Bell. I do suggest that you look her up and follow some of the very interesting work that she's deploying there. I'm coming on to now where we had a presentation from Salahin Muhammad Ali from Singapore Management University on the idea of robots coming for our jobs. I think we've heard people being afraid of that idea. What he was actually talking about was the idea of bots, or I heard this lovely term last week, AI beings. Apparently that's less confronting than robots. I'm not sure about that. That sounds a bit like science fiction to me, but anyway. But he was saying, you know, how can we harness robots in libraries in productive ways and not be fearful that they'll be taking our jobs, but actually creating some kind of human interaction that can be an addition to what we do and not taking away from that. So some very challenging ideas, I think. Monica Sujenko, who's one of our other board members, was saying there what delights, disruptions and surprises are presented when the algorithms of discovery look more like serendipity than familiarity. So talking there again about the delight that's possible with the intersection of technology and artificial intelligence. Here's some of the people who I presented with at Info Online. If you want to have a look at some of the presentations, I'm putting this up for you to have a look at the website because there's some fantastic presentations. If you obviously didn't get to the conference yourselves, I do encourage you to have a look at those presentations. This was a gang that I was presenting with where we did lightning talks, and most of you who I haven't met won't know that usually I speak at 20 to the dozen anyway. I'm actually trying to slow myself down right now. That asking me to do an 8-minute lightning talk is like, something on speed that's really hard to kind of decipher, so it's a little bit full on. But anyway, I do encourage you to have a look at those presentations. Now this beautiful slide is taking us to the fabulous Library of Congress librarian, Carla Hayden. She was beamed in from the US. I was a little bit disappointed, I have to say, in the program when I heard that she was just joining us via Skype. But and Mike's nodding here, truly was like she was in the room with us. It was the most incredible thing. What a gracious and amazing woman, you'd have to agree, wouldn't you? She was speaking about the importance of diversity in particular and outreach. She also had a lovely take on her journey as a library leader, and one of the lovely things that I just enjoyed so much was her talking about being an accidental librarian. I don't actually think she's an accidental librarian at all. I think she's been quite a career librarian, but she sees herself as someone who's been fortunate to fall into these amazing leadership roles. But she really was extraordinary. She talked very powerfully about the role of young people and outreach to young people in particular, and a critical piece of work around that at the Library of Congress. Some of you may know that the Library of Congress also has, I'll just sit this here for a minute because I've known something else. It has a part of their library called the Centre for the Book, which actually acts as their national promotion of reading heart, if you like, of the United States. So they run a whole lot of literacy and reading promotion campaigns from that particular centre. Hands up if you've been to the Library of Congress. Did any of you cry? You can be honest. I did, thank you, James. I did. I have to say, I had the great fortune of visiting the Library of Congress when I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship in 2010, which was the most wonderful experience of my life. What that afforded for me was to travel the globe, I was going to say the universe, it felt like the universe, to travel the globe for 7 weeks, looking at best practice in libraries and literacy and reading promotion activities. And it took me from Australia to Singapore, to Scotland, to London, to Denmark, to Amsterdam, to Croatia, to France, then to America, to New York and to Washington DC, and a number of places in between. Anne-Marie Schwertlich was our CEO at the time at the State Library, and when I went to say goodbye to her on the Friday night before I left that weekend, and I handed my program across to her, and I said, Anne-Marie, I'm getting a bit worried that every time I show anyone this program, they raise their eyebrows and have their eyes wide. And I said, I'm not sure what they're trying to tell me. And she looked at the program and saw that I was going to 52 destinations in 7 weeks, and she said, well, I'm not surprised. And then she patted me on the arm, and those of you who know Anne-Marie will know that this is very typical of her in her elegant way, and she said, and we would expect nothing less of you, my dear. So when I got to go to the Library of Congress, I have to admit, I'd been travelling for about 6.5 weeks, so I was a bit pathetic by that stage, and I did cry. I thought it was just amazing. So really, really beautiful stuff. Now this slide here, I'm going to take you to is a session that I went to, which was called The 5 Senses of Glamour. So it was looking at the 5 senses through the lens of the glam industry. So if you talk about glamour now, was the new term I heard at Info Online, was galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and does anyone know what the stands for? Thank you very much. Records management, that's right. So we heard from some very interesting people about the intersectionality of the glam sector. Now this particular slide we're looking at is looking at the State Library collections from New South Wales and turning them into, wait for it, music. Now I'm not going to show you how this happens, but I am here to tell you I've got a little door prize for one of you lucky people, so you're going to get to take home some of these things I'm going to show you. But we were presented with these amazing cards, and it's a project called 80 Hertz, so do Google it and have a look at it. It was based on an amazing structure that was built outside the State Library of, did I say Victoria? I meant New South Wales. Sorry, New South Wales, thank goodness. And it's a sight and sound delight, and you walk into this structure and you can discover pictures from the collection, and this is one of them. And this amazing, amazing fellow, Thomas Wing Evans, has created algorithms that turn these pictures into music. Oh, I haven't opened that one. That's a new one. Anyway, they're magnificent, beautiful art cards, a bit like this one, and they haven't got all the drawings on them. He just did that for our purpose so we could understand. And you can hear music when you download the app and you put your phone over these pictures, and the pictures create music. Now that's a great application of technology, I reckon. Amazing stuff around intersectionality, collections, and bringing the collections alive and animating the collection content. Really interesting. The other, so there we are, 80 Hertz. The other one that we heard from was a presenter who was talking about VR, of course, and you will have all seen, I'm sure, these fabulous little doohickeys, which are cardboard and can turn your phone into a 3D VR headset experience. and quite amazing. Have you all seen these? Yeah, most of you have seen them. So they're only about $2 each. They're not very expensive actually. So you sit your phone in back here. I won't do it for you, but basically you can look through, and those little lovely lenses that give you there turn 3D images and 3D film into a 3D experience through your phone. Quite amazing when you think about it. So we're introduced to the 3D photography and scanning through this this idea of making sculptures really out of 2D images. So that was quite interesting as well. And again, animating collections in a different way. The other one that we talked about, I'll just zoom up here, is there's the VR unit I've mentioned already. Let's just go forward. Sorry if this is making me feel a bit ill as I whiz by. I'm just going over some of the stuff we've covered already. Now, this is David Woodbridge. Thank you, Mike. This is your tweet. Actually, I'm cheating, aren't I, using one of your tweets. Now, David Woodbridge is actually blind. This was a really interesting story. And what he talked to us about was the challenges of visiting our galleries and museums and libraries, of course, when you are completely blind, which David is. No, not quite. Visually challenged, but not quite completely blind, but near to. Anyway, he was talking about his experience, and what he showed to us and demonstrated to us was a technical assistant, which is called ARAO, I think it's how it's pronounced. And it's actually, by looking through David's phone, when he holds it up, there's someone on the end of the phone call who is, and this is international volunteers who work on this system, who's seeing what he can see, and the person on the end of the phone describes to him what he's seeing. It was absolutely beautiful. And the person he rang, I think, was in the States, Mike? From memory. American accent, I seem to recall. So on the other side of the world, seeing, while he held up his phone, us in the room, and she described exactly what was happening to him. What an incredible experience. We had these glasses to imagine what it's like to have glaucoma when you're in living with visual impairment, and it's really quite disconcerting. You can come up and have a go at that later if you want to. But that was a lovely little experience of how can we augment people's experience of our GLEM sector by adding to that. Now, Professor Stephen Liu was a very interesting and quite frankly quite weird person, I have to say, talking about the weird and wonderful, and he was really putting together information about insects in particular, and taste. So his sense was taste. So I mentioned earlier this was about 5 senses, right? So we've had visual, we've had hearing with music, we've had, I think that's it. Have I missed something? I've missed something. 3D, that's still under visual. Smell. Oh, I haven't got to smell yet. So this one was around taste. So we had the pleasure of eating chocolate, ant and insect jewellery. So we were, here's my ring, my fancy ring. So it was a ring made out of wire, and it had this chocolate inside it with ants in it. It was a little bit of a funny experience to eat that chocolate, I have to say. There you go. Yes, I was going to say, some people went, no thank you. That's right, there were corn chips that had some insects in them too, wasn't it? Yeah, very funny. Crickets in your corn chips. Really interesting stuff though, and this is meant to push us a little bit, you know, beyond the norm. The last one I want to mention before I go away from that was actually the smell. Thank you for reminding me of that, and I didn't tweet about that. This was absolutely beautiful. This was an art project which was called The Century's Breath by Cat Jones. And in our little bags we had a little vial of smell, and again you're welcome to come up and have a smell of this later. And each of us had a different one. And this was actually part of a beautiful large art installation downstairs in the conference centre, where you could go and actually see the way that this was curated together. It really was beautiful, wasn't it? This particular one that I've got is called Underground Lovers. The designer was Kate Hull. The concept is the coastline in all its original state, earth, plants and creatures. Humans live underground, aromas are air, rock and cool air. I can promise you, if you take the lid off that and dip in one of these little things and have a smell of that, you will not believe how that represents this beautiful description. The project takes the maps, the historical maps from particular areas, and maps that scent. So a beautiful little piece of historical information there too that you might like to come and have a look at. In a moment, I'm going to ask my trusty assistant to do a random pen point, or I think she's come up with some wonderful way of selecting one of you.
I have. Everyone's name is on a scrap bit of paper.
Yeah.
Very efficient. We'll know
Well done.
next time.
Well done. So I've got a bag for one of you of unopened goodies.
I triple-checked it that I've included everyone's name.
Well done.
I would be embarrassed if someone missed out.
Absolutely. So you're going to have a little goodie bag to take home because I got an extra one to bring back for you all, so I can share that with you. So you can have an explore yourself. Now I know it's going to be probably pretty tedious to go through all of my tweets because there's about 120 of them. So I'm not going to make you sit through that, and we are going to run out of time for the other presenters. But I just want to really zoom through and just stop at a couple, if I may, just for a few more minutes. So here we were talking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which many of you will have come across already. A really important piece of work that IFLA has taken up to showcase the role of libraries in helping us as a global cohort to address these wicked problems that have been identified as the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And the wonderful Gloria Perez-Salmaron, who's the president of IFLA, presented on the work that's been done on libraries in that space. So really fantastic. Gerald Lightner was also there, who's the General Secretary for IFLA, and he talked about really the role we have in creating the future. So as you can see from some of the presentations I've already presented to you, they've been quite challenging and thought-provoking, and it is about saying to us, what's your role? What's your role in your libraries around imagining the future? And I think on that note, without going on further, I think what I want to say around that note is to say another presentation I attended last week was put on by the Demographics Group, and many of you will know of Bernard Salt's work, AM, who gives us presentations about the predictions for demographics in our country ahead. The worrying thing that he shared on that day was the prediction that our country is moving into a two-tiered society. Now, we have never had a class society, particularly in Australia. We've been the lucky country for a long time. We've had a few people who've been really, really rich, and a number of people, yes, who've lived below the poverty line. But in the main, we've had a lot of social mobility in the middle, where if you had the drive, you know, the education, the right kind of choices that you make in your life, you could create the life you want to create. We are now moving into a very different world ahead in Australia, where with transient and non-permanent workforce, with wonderful but also challenging opportunities like Uber, driving, Airbnb and so on, what this does is provide non-permanent incomes for people. The top tier of that gap, so that's the lower end of the gap where people won't be able to necessarily have the education skills they need to get ahead in their lives, to actually have stable jobs and income. The top side of that gap will be the people who have got an education. So if you're a parent in the room, I pass on Bernard's recommendation to you, and that is to make sure your kids get an education or a trade, one or the other, and take that responsibility very seriously, because it will be the game changer, more so than it ever has been in the past. The proposition that I put to Bernard and others on the panel was to say, do they think that this is the great golden opportunity for public libraries, that gap in the middle, and for libraries in general, around the work that we can do in helping people to have skills for the future and imagining what the future might be, in having that soft entry point to technology and discovery without being too afraid. Because let's face it, it is a bit scary, some of this stuff. So I think that I'll leave it there, even though there's another 100 tweets there that you can go and knock yourselves out on. Please do, if you want to come back to me to ask any questions about these tweets, because they might feel a bit random in the absence of an explanation or in the absence of the program. But you can have a look at the program online still, on Info Online. So if you see a tweet and go, what's that about? You can have a look at the detail of the program and the speakers. And the other thing you can do is contact me as well if you want to have further information about that. So my Twitter handle is PJSK65. You now all know how old I am as well, but that's another story. And I'm going to just give away a little thing before we hand over. Is that all right? So, who'd like to be the... Mike, why don't you be the barrel guy, seeing as I didn't tweet about your particular wonderful presentation.
Could you possibly move over here so we're in the Facebook Live feed?
So we're what? Oh, I didn't know we were being recorded. Okay, sorry about
Sorry.
Sorry, hold on, we've lost me.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Put them all back.
I'll put these Grand
Right.
prize.
Okay.
Ta-da!
And the winner is of this lovely, exciting, hopefully it'll be exciting for you, not scare the bejesus out of you. Is it Cora? Cora? Yeah, K-A-R...
Cara.
Cara! Yay! Come on now! Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed that. And I'll leave all the bits and pieces for you to have a look at later. The rest of you'd like to come up and look at those a little later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Paula. That was an incredibly insightful and interesting presentation. I enjoyed that immensely. Our next speaker is an archivist, a collections consultant and a historian based right here in Melbourne. He has recently completed his PhD at the University of Melbourne School of Historical and Philosophical Studies, exploring relationality and the interconnectedness of archives and museum collections. Please give a warm welcome to Mike Jones.
I'm just going to quickly switch these computers
Yeah, I was
across.
going to say, you want to get rid of that background.
While Mike's doing that, one thing we forgot to do is introduce ourselves. For those of you that don't know us, I'm Kim Wilson, I'm the treasurer of ALIAVic. We've got James Baker, Alan Coates, Michael Berry, our secretary. In case you don't know us.
Michael, I've called you James 3 times. I apologise. James, thank you for coming out. Sorry.
I'm just going to put a timer on, so I
had a timer going, Mike, with Paula, so I'm happy to time you.
I ignored you though.
You did. I was too embarrassed to sort of go ding ding. So,
that's right. I'll put one on so I can see it up the front.
okay, what do you want to stop at?
How long have I got? I could fill up the time available, so...
15 minutes.
Okay, 15 minutes, done.
Okay.
It sounds like they're having a lot of fun next week.
Well, you stopped next time, don't you?
So I gave a 45-minute talk, which I'm now going to give in 15 minutes. But that's easier than giving it in 10. And I have cut some of my slides out, so I'm giving a shorter version of the talk that I gave at Information Online. But this link here is to the full slide deck from that presentation, and it was filmed as well, so there's a version on YouTube. So if what I tell you this evening sparks your interest in some way and you want to dig a bit further, you can look at the kind of extended director's cut from the Info Online Conference. So I also want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And one of the things that I noted at the conference is that we use these kind of welcome to country or the acknowledgement of country at the start of talks like this. And those things in themselves are about relationships in many ways. They're about relationships to land, they're about relationships to colonial past. And it's really interesting to think about the collecting organisations that we're part of, whether they're museums, libraries, archives, and the ways in which we both reinforce and get opportunities to challenge some of that history over time, and the relationship that we have to those sorts of communities. And that's part of some of the work that I've been doing in this space. Is this going to work? My clicker, so... Oh, okay. Just one sec. Okay, so this is a digital display that's in the Australian Museum up in Sydney, which is just down the road from where the conference was. And it's part of the new Westpac Gallery that opened there in October 2017, I think it was. And this is a really interesting sort of illustration of the way that places like exhibition spaces, in contemporary exhibition spaces in particular, have started to think about the way that things interconnect and come up with ways of interacting with collections and collections-based material that isn't about putting in a bunch of text in a text box or trying to search for stuff by keywords. These are falling, sort of cascading digital displays, and that's my hand popping in there. If you see something that's interesting that goes past, you can touch it on these giant sort of scrolling touch screens, and it brings these groups of material together around it and creates these kind of little aggregates of material where you can see different bits of collection material, whether they're documents, artworks, artifacts, and other pieces. And these sorts of ways of exploring are really interesting in that kind of interactive, embodied way that you engage with these things. But one of the areas that I've looked at is also how our collections data supports, or in many ways doesn't support, this sort of interaction with our sorts of collections. Because displays like this are quite often produced, and this is an example of this, quite often produced by sort of custom making databases and custom developing links to create a display system. But that information doesn't roll back into cataloging systems, it doesn't roll back into those foundational kind of underlying systems. And we have to kind of custom build these things all the time and then redo it every time we want to rediscover these connections. Exhibition spaces as well have increasingly moved away from kind of discipline splits, and this includes splits between archives and libraries and other collection material. Places like the 200 Treasures exhibition, which is downstairs from those cascading displays, brings together cases that have got rare books, they've got archival material and artworks, they've got natural history specimens, they've got artifacts, they've got indigenous material that's collected by anthropologists and ethnographers. And all this material is brought together to tell stories, and they explicitly use notions of entanglement in these sort of spaces where it's about the entanglement of these disparate collection materials as a way of telling a story and bringing out narrative in interesting ways. And this is something, I keep on getting the Kathleen Syme Wi-Fi trying to connect. Excuse me one sec. I'm going to turn my Wi-Fi off. Okay. So this is something which has a really long tradition, and people who know the history of sort of museums and collections will know this sort of history of ideas of cabinets of wonder, these sort of Renaissance cabinets where all this material was brought together, and you can see natural history specimens here with a library running down the side. Now, this material was quite often brought together in a way where the ideal environment for learning at this point and for developing knowledge was to have a library, a natural history collection, a lab, a garden, manuscript collections, and bring all that material into a space and develop knowledge through the intersection of those things, not by just studying one of those components. But the way that we've presented this sort of content to users through catalogues and things like that has quite often not represented that sort of interconnection very well at all. And again, the lack of representation of that goes all the way back to kind of early catalogues. This is one of the first from the 17th century, and it's pretty much just a list that's just saying, well, this is what's in my collection. There are really occasional bits where there's some interesting, kind of contextual content and knowledge. There's this idea of a bird called Rock, who, as author's report, is able to truss an elephant. And these little bits of knowledge just kind of appear through there, but it doesn't tell you where they come from or link through to any other kind of content. And then we get into things like registers and card catalogues and other ways of documenting, but a lot of that is about getting people to material, but not telling them a lot about it or showing how it connects or interconnects. When computing came in, it seemed to potentially give an opportunity to change the way that that practice occurred. From sort of World War II, going through, punch cards were picked up fairly early in libraries. I actually don't know what dates these are from, but they did start using punch cards in libraries as far back as at least the 1950s as part of managing kind of circulation and loans and things like that. This idea you have a punch card in the back of your library book and don't take this out because it helps us keep track of it is an interesting idea. But library theorists around this time were starting to think, well, how do computers actually give us an opportunity to potentially do things differently? And this is from 1963, where they're saying, well, let's try and think about a system where if we have all these principal functions of libraries that we do at the moment, like cataloguing, distribution, loans, etc., and do those things automatically without radically departing from what we're doing at the moment, we can imagine that. But that sort of system, they argue, in 1963, if that's instrumented on a modest scale, it will yield very unsatisfactory results. If it's taken to its logical limit, it's patently absurd. And in any event, if it solves any problem at all, it solves the wrong problem. What they were saying is technology actually gives us an opportunity to do something quite different and to change the way that people engage with things. And the suggestion here, which was quite radical for 1963, was to say, well, actually what people are looking for when they come to places like libraries or other collecting institutions is knowledge, is the answer to questions. And they're saying, well, we can bring all that knowledge together and people can then ask a computer the answer to the question and they don't need to retrieve a book and try and find the answer themselves. The computer will tell them what the answer is. We're still not at that stage at the moment, and we probably never will be. But it's interesting to think about how those sort of early technologies were trying to rethink what institutions were like, not just to do what we're already doing faster. And I think we still kind of fall into that trap sometimes of just trying to do what we're already doing faster or more efficiently, rather than actually reconceptualizing the sort of services and the sort of documentation and the sort of collections that we're responsible for. The problem at this stage is that computers were actually really, really limited. So, I mean, they might have had dreams of artificial intelligence, but this is what cataloguing looked like for the manuscript division in the Library of Congress, really basic fielded information. This is what museum cataloguing looked like at the Science Museum here in Melbourne in about 1978. This system started in 1976. You had to handwrite it out in little boxes, all in capital letters, all the information about these items, which was so laborious that it actually restricted the amount of information that was captured about things. It had to all be in capital letters because the memory on the computers was so limited that it couldn't take 2 character sets, it couldn't take lowercase and uppercase at the same time because it didn't have the capacity. And interestingly, we think about technology updating, but we don't necessarily think about our data updating at the same time. Because this was 1976, they've been through about 3 or 4 systems since then, but you still find material in the current cataloguing system at the museum that's all in capital letters because the description hasn't changed since it was captured in the 1970s. So we might be rethinking the way we present this sort of stuff online and present it to users, but if we don't think the fundamental underlying data, then we're still dealing with stuff the way that people thought about it 30, 40, 50 years ago. This is what computer entry looked like even in the 1980s. This is someone sitting there filling in a form with a pencil. There's no computer in sight. There's a great sheepskin chair there. And this was the result of a lot of that. It was a microfiche catalogue. And those things weren't updated very often. The museum's version of a microfiche catalogue was only updated once a year. So it wasn't a particularly responsive system. So the web came along. This is a beautiful web page. We're talking about Library of Congress. This is what a web page for the Dead Sea Scrolls site would have looked like if you were looking at it in Netscape on a Mac in 1993, which I'm sure some people in the room will remember. I certainly remember it. And the amazing thing about this, and one of the amazing things about places like the Library of Congress, that site's still available online at the moment with exactly the same content in it. So you can still get a site from 1993 via the current Library of Congress site, which is a pretty good piece of kind of digital preservation over time. But interestingly, people started piling onto the web in the 90s. There were collections that were appearing online more and more, libraries, archives, museums, galleries. When we get into the 2000s at places like Museums Victoria, we see these flips happening where the 2001, 2002 versus 2000, 2001 was the period where the number of visitors to the website overtook the number of physical visitors to the institutions. And those numbers have continued to split. So more and more visitors online, not less visitors coming through the doors, in some cases more through the doors as well, but the proportion has continued to change. But if what we're providing in those online collections, in say these 13.5 million digital records through the Smithsonian, or the 100,000 items or 1 million specimens through Museums Victoria, or these 52 million items through Europeana, or 457 million items through Trove, if all those items are just drawing on the catalogue data that was captured on coding forms in the 1970s, on our catalogue cards, in all these other sorts of registers, and we're not thinking about the underlying data and what we can do with it, then we're still just presenting lots and lots and lots of content, millions of items of content as discrete collection records, the same as they were back in the day when we were doing things in physical form. We're just doing stuff faster and giving people access to more of it. Obviously, these are gross generalizations, but they stick in a lot of these cases. It's a bit like, it's sort of probably not fashionable to criticize Tim Berners-Lee, but this idea of kind of raw data now that comes out of the kind of web movement is actually in itself problematic. They're saying, well, just give us your data and we'll do interesting stuff with it. But what if we gave people more interesting data? What if we thought about reshaping and changing that sort of content so people could do more interesting things with it? Part of the problem of this is that we've got really siloed systems underneath the surface. So libraries, archives, museums, you look at a single institution and quite often if they have mixed collections, they'll still use different systems to document them. So you look in a big museum and they'll have a library system, an archive system, and a museum system, and they won't talk. You look at some big museums and they have different systems per discipline, so there'll be an anthropology system and a natural history system, and all of those elements, and those things won't be connected either. It's just silos of discrete little collection records. We've got all these different standards, but quite often they're not very good at interconnecting and relating to each other because the different professions and different areas use different standards for different things. We've got all our associations. I'm part of some of these. But professionalisation in itself has been a problem in terms of some of the things that it's created in the GLAM sector, because people have tried to separate themselves off and their collections off as a way of asserting their professional identity. That's something I could talk about a lot more, but I don't have time. And you actually see the effect of these splits on things like museum websites, where you get research catalogues that are collections and libraries and archives that are separate. You get collections, archives, photographs and publications that are all separate, and we're expecting people to do all the work of connecting this stuff up for themselves. And one of the problems with this is an over-reliance on search boxes. So search boxes are great, it lets people find lots of things, but it's causing our users to do all the work. And if someone finds the connections between things, or if we know the connections between things as institutions, but we're saying to users, well, you search for it and you work out the connections yourself, the next user who comes along needs to work out those connections for themselves as well. And so does the next one, and so does the next one, and so does the next one. The data that underlies this isn't improving, it's not becoming more connected, and we're not being generous with the knowledge that we have about our own collections to our users in a useful way. So the example that I've used before a few times is this, which is only 100,000 dots, and if you think of those millions of discrete records that were there before. And what we're doing with search is saying, look, we've got 100,000 dots, and if you type something in, you'll find a dot. But where do you go from there? There's no pathways to follow, there's no connections, there's no trails, there's no relationships. And being monstrously unfair to GLAM institutions, but if you type in aggregate into Google image search and think about what an aggregator is, you actually get lots of images that look like this. It kind of looks a bit like the bunch of dots. It's just this whole pile of discrete records, and it's really difficult to find your way through. So, I'm already over time, so I'll go quickly. What if we fundamentally rethought some of those things, that rather than just documenting individual items, putting it aside, documenting the next one, we thought in museums and archives and libraries and special collections about building networks of content with pathways that people could follow. Or if we thought about different metaphors, there's a whole bunch from sort of theoretical areas around kind of non-hierarchical things like rhizomes rather than trees, for example. What if we were thinking, well, I don't want to follow the infrastructure that's been built for me, I want to follow my own path, and I want to see the paths that other people have followed through these collections, a bit like a kind of desire line for a park. The history of computing has things that haven't been picked up effectively by many institutions and by many systems. Vannevar Bush is one of them who came up with this idea of building trails through collections, and users could build those trails, and then years down the track you could follow the path that you'd followed through a collection in the past, because he thought that knowledge was about connecting things up, not just about individual kind of resources. There are these notions of trees, but trees are really limiting because you have to go down to the end of a twig, and then if you want to find something else, you've got to go all the way back to the trunk and then navigate your way through again. But culture and knowledge doesn't work that way. It's much more intertwined and interconnected. So what if we thought about information structures that supported that sort of knowledge? People have talked about moving away from notions of trees to things like coral reefs, and what sort of effect does a metaphor like that have on the type of collections that we manage? There's notions of hypertext from people like Ted Nelson, this idea that everything's intertwingled and that we need to have visible connections between things that we can follow both ways. What if we started to think about a collection documentation like that? There are projects like Humanities Network Infrastructure where users can create their own connections between things and describe them any way they want, and then other users can see the connections that previous users have created, so you kind of stumble across these networks of content that people have discovered. And these sort of ideas run through other knowledge systems. We're sometimes so tied up in kind of Western knowledge systems and knowledge systems that have come out of the 19th century in Indigenous communities and other communities, they think about things as being fundamentally interconnected as the way that they view the world, and yet we split things apart into groups and categories and classifications and get rid of some of that content. And there's a whole theoretical tradition from the 60s running through to the present that I won't go into in any detail at all, but it runs across many, many disciplines, and we're not reflecting that in the way that we manage our stuff. So what if, rather than kind of focusing on the banks of the river or the entities on either side, that we started thinking about the gaps in the middle and how we capture more information about how things connect and the way that things change through time? What would our collections look like around that? And this isn't just about changing the systems that we use or the tools that we use. There's this idea that those sort of relationships are not just about machines and information technologies, that things are kind of relational and interconnected all the way down. And if we reconceptualize our work in that way, it'll change the way that we do what we do. Thank you. Do you want me to recap that one?
Francis, you need the computer? Yeah, no, we're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for that presentation, Mike. I really am starting to regret that I didn't go to Information Online, because the full keynote speech would have been so much more fascinating. So I'll have to see if there's a copy of that online. Yes. All right, our next speaker was actually on the committee who organised the conference, and she'll be speaking to us about some of the things involved with that. Please welcome Frances O'Neill.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, it is a fabulous thing actually that all the papers or a majority of papers and presentations are made freely available, you know, within a very short time after the conference. And you can't actually get to everything that's on. So even those of us who were there, I've actually been able to catch up on things that I missed out on that I wasn't able to get to. So I was asked to kind of speak about being on the organising committee, but just to, by way of a bit of introduction, I work at Victoria University, where I'm one of the library directors, and the area that I head up is library education and research services to basically the academy, the academics and students of the university. And I've actually been on a number of organising committees. Probably the longest running one has been VALA, and Mike is also on the VALA organising committee. I started as VALA had very large organising and very loose organising committees for many years, and I was a corresponding member, and then I started attending meetings, and now I'm on a much smaller, tighter organising committee. So it sort of changed over the years. But I started doing it as basically kind of professional development, doing something extra, you know, beyond my day job. Also getting a bit more involved with, you know, professional organisations, and it's been I highly recommend it in terms of if you're looking to do something beyond just going to conferences, being an organiser of them. So apart from VALA, I was also on an e-research organising committee and that was again another very different thing. It was entirely online because we're spread all around Australia. All our meetings were webinars, but I think I did that for a couple of rounds, a couple of conferences, but that again changed and it became a smaller committee, and I kind of dropped back out of that one. And then I noticed in one of my issues of Insight, they were calls for expressions of interest to be on ALIA Online for 2019. I'm thinking, okay, you know, maybe it's time for a change. I was planning to give up VALA, but I didn't in the end, so I kept doing both, and I was thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? But ALIA Online finally stopped, so got a bit of time back, but yeah, it was a bit punishing. But anyway, and so I put in my expression of interest and you know, got on the committee. Now the ALIA Online committee is a very even tighter, very small committee. I think there's 5 of us. There's Vicky McDonald, who was then the president of ALIA, Roxanne Missingham, who's the university librarian at ANU, Miley Joseph, who worked at the State Library of New South Wales, and she was important on the committee because the conference was in Sydney and she was the only one who was in Sydney. So she was pretty key. And Kate Davis is a researcher up at USQ, University of Southern Queensland, which is actually Toowoomba. And I think she commutes from Brisbane, which is quite a job there. That's Vicky, Roxanne, Marley, and me. That's right. But of course, ably supported by a very well-oiled machine called ALIA House, and Christine Granata is the key person there. And I have to say, if you're interested in being on an organising committee, talk to Christina, find out, you know, what the vacancies are, because I know I'm not putting my hand up again because I'm on the VALA one again. And it was the other, but I guess more broadly, whether it's VALA or ALIA, I mean, I think you join these things with an idea of what topics and maybe speakers, you know, who you want to hear from and who you think the profession needs to hear from. And I think with the with ALIA Information Online, it was Paula and Mike have kind of, well, Mike was one of the keynotes, but it was a stellar number of keynotes. There were 3 on each day, which is kind of unusual. It's, you know, really good value for a conference. And they were, stellar presenters. And Carla Hayden, as Paula said, it felt like she was in the room. I've been at kind of video conferences before with, you know, large meetings and somebody's on the other side of the world. And it hasn't kind of worked, so I had, wasn't sure how, but she was so engaging as well, that, you know, she had a real presence that kind of, the video conference, it worked really well. So, and I think one of the other interesting keynotes, and it gets back to, I think, the point that Genevieve Bell started with, when she was talking about artificial intelligence, one of the kind of sub-themes was actually about the other voice in terms of, and that's that, what I think you were saying, Paula, about people, who, the disenfranchised, and the role of libraries in meeting that need, and in fact the mission of libraries in meeting that need. And I think that was the theme also of Carla's talk, and she made the point that libraries are one of the few organisations that primarily give, and I thought that was a really nice kind of character or role that libraries also provide. And it also tied in with I think the last keynote, which was Terry Janke, who is an Indigenous lawyer based in Sydney, who has developed a kind of schema for, what do you call it? Protocols for negotiating cultural and intellectual property rights that is trying to kind of, I guess, remedy and build bridges between, you know, where the ownership a lot of, in, for example, our collections of Indigenous materials, and how we describe those and how we use those, which again, as I said, picks up that theme of the other, the voice of the other. So I think that's probably the main things I wanted to kind of say about being on the organising committee and giving you a few of my kind of insights about the conference itself. And I did take the opportunity to wear my badge again tonight. You know, it's not many times I'm going to get to do that. And I have a few, not only great badges that were given away by had fantastic vendor spaces and vendors at the conference. But I also had I have a couple of bespoke badges. They're unique, created by the one and only Kate Davies, who actually organised a lot of the games around the clip game and also the campfire, the scout activity where I won't go into it, but anyway, hence my little campfire. You had to kind of gather a few things. That was actually from the Glamour, the 5 senses. That was the instructions on our packets that Paula showed you what was in there. Please await further instructions. I had the opportunity also to kind of spruik being add another badge, if you like, to my badge. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much for your insight, Francis. We're going to take a 5-minute break while we set up for the question panel. We'll have our 3 speakers up again and also some special guests from OCLC and EBSCO. So if you would like to stand up, stretch your legs, there's still some chips and dip there, there's still some cheese, and we'll get everything ready for next week.